Picture this. It's May 1940. Nazi Germany is crushing Europe. Their Air Marshal, Hermann Göring, is holding an intelligence report in his hands. The report says America wants to build 50,000 planes a year. Göring laughs. He actually laughs. He tosses the report aside and says, "The Americans are desperate. They know nothing about building warplanes. Let them try." Fast forward 4 years. That same man, Hermann Göring, sits in a prison cell at Nuremberg. He's staring at production charts, and his hands are shaking. The numbers in front of him are impossible. America didn't build 50,000 planes a year. They built 100,000. In 1 year alone, a single American factory outproduced his entire Luftwaffe. This is the story of the greatest miscalculation in military history. The moment when Nazi arrogance met American industrial might. And it didn't just change World War II, it changed the entire world. May 28, 1940. Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. The scene was almost comical in retrospect. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring sat at his massive oak desk, surrounded by his senior staff officers. He picked up the intelligence report that had just arrived from Washington. His face twisted with undisguised contempt as he read the words. President Franklin Roosevelt had just asked the United States Congress for something that sounded completely insane. The ability to manufacture 50,000 aircraft per year, not over several years, per year, every single year. Göring actually laughed out loud. His staff officers exchanged knowing glances and chuckled along with him. "The Americans are desperate if they believe such propaganda will frighten us," Göring announced confidently. "They know nothing of war production. These automobile makers think they can simply convert their factories?" He shook his head dismissively. "They will learn that building warplanes requires far more than simple assembly lines and mass production techniques." The room erupted in agreement. After all, Germany had been building military aircraft for years. They had experience, they had engineering expertise, they had the best fighter pilots in the world. America was an ocean away, building cars and refrigerators. What could they possibly know about warfare? But what Göring and his staff completely failed to grasp was that at that very moment in Detroit, Michigan, a quiet Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already proving every single one of them wrong. The former president of General Motors, now working for exactly $1 per year as Roosevelt's production chief, was orchestrating the most ambitious industrial transformation in all of human history. And here's the kicker. Within just 4 years, American factories wouldn't produce the impossible 50,000 aircraft that Göring had dismissed with such contempt. They would produce nearly 100,000 planes annually, all while simultaneously supplying 2 completely separate theaters of war on opposite sides of the planet. Let's rewind 12 days earlier to understand how we got here. May 16th, 1940. While German panzer divisions were racing through France, crushing everything in their path, Franklin Roosevelt stood before the United States Congress. The world was watching. America was watching. And Roosevelt said something that made even his closest allies think he'd lost his mind. "Should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year," the president declared. The reaction was immediate skepticism, even among America's friends, even among Roosevelt's own supporters. You have to understand the context to appreciate how crazy this sounded. In 1939, just 1 year earlier, America had produced exactly 3,000 Cossack-11 military aircraft, total. For the entire year, the United States Army Air Corps possessed roughly 1,700 combat planes at that moment, and many of them were already obsolete. Some were biplanes. We're talking about aircraft that would have looked more at home in World War I than World War II. Yet Roosevelt was demanding a 14-fold increase in production. Not gradually, not over a decade. He wanted it done in a handful of years. Military experts called it fantasy. Industrial leaders called it impossible. German intelligence called it propaganda. But Roosevelt had a secret weapon: Bill Knudsen. When Roosevelt's advisors asked who could possibly achieve such impossible production goals, presidential advisor Bernard Baruch gave what might be history's most confident recommendation. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. William Knudsen was everything America represented. Born in Denmark, he'd immigrated to America as a young man with nothing but ambition and an engineering mind. He worked his way up through the American automotive industry, eventually becoming president of General Motors. By 1940, he was earning $300,000 annually, which in today's money would be worth several $1,000,000. But when his adopted nation called, Knudsen abandoned that enormous salary. He walked away from one of the most powerful positions in American industry to serve for $1 per year. Why? Because he understood what was at stake. He understood that democracy itself was under threat, and he knew that America's industrial capacity could be the weapon that saved freedom. Knudsen brought something Germany couldn't match: decades of experience in automotive mass production. But more than that, he brought an understanding of American industrial culture. He knew how to motivate workers. He knew how to streamline processes. He knew how to take complex products and break them down into manageable components that could be built by ordinary people with minimal training. Most importantly, he knew how to think big. Really big. The transformation didn't happen gradually. It exploded. By December 1941, just 18 months after Roosevelt's announcement, American factories were already producing 2,000 military aircraft per month. That's a 20-fold increase from just 2 years earlier. Think about that. In less time than it takes most companies to redesign a single product, America had completely revolutionized an entire industry. The Ford Motor Company announced plans for a massive bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle facilities so rapidly that construction crews were still building new factory wings while the existing sections were already churning out bombers. Douglas Aircraft started hiring thousands of workers every week. The arsenal of democracy wasn't just awakening, it was roaring to life. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. While all this was happening, Nazi Germany's leadership was actively ignoring the warning signs. It wasn't just ignorance, it was willful blindness, driven by the most toxic combination of racial prejudice and ideological arrogance you can imagine. General Friedrich von Boertker served as the Wehrmacht's military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941. For 8 years, he watched American industry up close. He toured factories. He read production reports. He understood what was coming. And he sent cable after cable back to Berlin, warning them. His December 1940 cable was particularly urgent. American war production will reach unimaginable heights. The industrial capacity being mobilized exceeds anything we've anticipated. Berlin's response? They dismissed his warnings as defeatist exaggeration. Some officials literally wrote propaganda across his reports. They couldn't believe it. They didn't want to believe it. In February 1939, von Boertker actually met personally with Adolf Hitler to discuss American industrial potential. This should have been the moment when reality broke through. Here was a trained military observer with nearly a decade of first-hand experience trying to warn Germany's leadership about what was coming. But Hitler wasn't interested in facts. Instead, he ranted about American racial degeneracy. He proclaimed Americans half-Judaized, half-negrified, and therefore incapable of sustained warfare. He believed that America's diverse population was a weakness, not a strength. He thought democracy made nations soft. He convinced himself that only totalitarian command could produce military power. This ideological blindness would prove absolutely fatal, and it didn't just affect Hitler. It permeated every single level of German military leadership. The Luftwaffe Intelligence Division provides some of the most shocking examples of this blindness. When reports started arriving about women entering American aircraft factories in large numbers, German analysts didn't see this as evidence of successful mobilization. They saw it as a sign of American desperation. They literally couldn't conceive that democratic mobilization might exceed totalitarian command. Their worldview simply couldn't accommodate that possibility. When reports arrived describing American factories running 3 complete shifts around the clock, German analysts assumed the numbers must be exaggerated. When they heard about production bonuses and worker motivation programs, they dismissed it as capitalist inefficiency. The Nazi worldview created a prison for their own thinking. They were so convinced of their racial superiority and the superiority of their system that they couldn't see reality even when it was documented in front of them. And that blindness was about to destroy them. Ford's Willow Run plant embodied everything about American ambition and industrial capability. Construction began on April 18, 1941, on Michigan farmland. What they built there was absolutely staggering in scale. The facility became the world's largest factory under a single roof. We're talking about 3.5 million square feet of production space. The assembly line stretched 1 full mile from beginning to end. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, made a promise that sounded completely insane. He would build 1 B-24 Liberator bomber per hour when other factories were struggling to produce 1 per day. The initial results were catastrophic. The first bomber that rolled out in September 1942 was so badly built it required complete rebuilding. Quality control failures reached 50%. Half of everything they were building had serious defects. By February 1943, Willow Run had produced just 56 bombers for the entire month, against promises of hundreds. Critics started calling it Will It Run instead of Willow Run. But here's where American culture and determination made all the difference. Instead of giving up, Ford's engineers persevered. They broke the B-24's design down into its 488 193 individual parts and organized them into manageable subassemblies. They developed new hydraulic riveting tools that were faster and more reliable. They created prefabricated wiring harnesses. They perfected moving assembly line techniques specifically for aircraft production. And here's the crazy part. While they were solving all these problems, they also accommodated 578 design changes in 1943 alone. That's more than 1 major modification every single day, all while trying to scale up production. They were building the plane while they were simultaneously redesigning it and expanding production capacity. By September 1943, monthly production reached 148 bombers. By December, 365. The breakthrough came in April 1944, when Willow Run produced 428 B-24 Liberators in a single month. That's 1 complete 4-engine heavy bomber, rolling off the assembly line every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Hermann Göring had laughed at the idea of America producing 50,000 planes a year. This single factory, built on Michigan farmland by immigrant workers and former housewives, was now outproducing the entire German aviation industry combined. The first German pilots to truly recognize American production superiority encountered it during the Tunisia campaign in North Africa. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 77, noted in his diary in December 1942. The American pilots are no longer amateurs. Most disturbing, there are more of them every day, every single day. That revelation accelerated dramatically through 1943. On January 27th came the first American bombing raid on Germany itself. Just 64 bombers attacking Wilhelmshaven. It seems small now, but it was a psychological shock to the German people. The war had come home. By October 1943, during what became known as Black Thursday at Schweinfurt, the mathematics of production had become inescapable. The Americans lost 60 B-17 Flying Fortresses in a single raid. 60. That should have been devastating. In any previous war, that kind of loss would have ended bombing campaigns for months. But here's what terrified the Germans. Those 60 bombers were completely replaced within 2 weeks. The Americans barely even paused. They just kept coming. During Big Week, from February 20th to 25th, 1944, The U.S. 8th and 15th Air Forces mounted 3,500 heavy bomber sorties against German aircraft production facilities. The Luftwaffe fought desperately. They lost between 262 and 345 fighters during those 6 days. But more critically, they lost approximately 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most respected fighter commanders, reported to Göring with devastating statistics. Germany was losing 1,200 fighters monthly while producing only 1,000. Meanwhile, America was producing 2,500 fighters monthly while losing just 400. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Germany was being bled white while America was just getting started. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 confirmed victories, described a mission over Brunswick in January 1944 that perfectly captures the hopelessness German pilots were facing. The bomber's stream stretched from horizon to horizon. I counted at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was completely hopeless. We attacked anyway because it was our duty. But we knew we were just throwing our lives away. For every bomber we damaged, 10 more appeared. It was like fighting the ocean. By 1944, American aircraft production reached proportions that still seem almost impossible today. That single year, American factories produced 96 270 military aircraft. Let me break that down because these numbers are staggering. 1648, 4-engine heavy bombers, 35 743, fighter aircraft, 22 591, multi-engine aircraft, and thousands more trainers, transports, and reconnaissance planes. Here's the number that really matters. That single year's production, just 1944, alone, exceeded Germany's entire wartime output from 1939 to 1945. Germany produced approximately 94,077 aircraft over 6 years of total war mobilization. America produced more than that in 12 months, while also building tanks, ships, trucks, and every other weapon of war. But the disparity went far beyond just numbers. Every American bomber carried 1350 caliber machine guns with thousands of rounds of ammunition. German fighters were increasingly launching missions with partial ammunition loads because they simply didn't have enough bullets. American bombers featured powered turrets, advanced bomb sights, and sophisticated navigation equipment. German fighters often lacked functioning radios. Think about that. They were fighting aerial combat without being able to communicate with each other reliably. Boeing's Seattle Plant 2 was producing 16 B-17 flying fortresses every single day by May 1944. Douglas Aircraft, which had employed just 68 people in 1936, had grown to 167,000 workers spread across 9 separate facilities. North American Aviation was churning out 500 P-51 Mustangs per month. Lockheed achieved production of 1 P-38, Lightning every 90 minutes, while simultaneously implementing 2,127 combat-driven modifications based on pilot feedback. The supporting industries matched this incredible pace. General Motors produced 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard built 55 523 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines for P-51 Mustangs. Alcoa's aluminum output increased by 600%. Dow Chemical's magnesium production grew from 6 million pounds annually to 333 million pounds. America wasn't just building planes. They were building an entirely new industrial infrastructure capable of supporting modern warfare on a global scale. The transformation of America's workforce completely shattered Nazi preconceptions about American society. This is one of the most powerful parts of the story because it shows how completely wrong Hitler's ideology was. Women comprised less than 1% of aircraft workers in 1941. By 1943, they represented 65%, 310,000 women working in aircraft production facilities across America. At Douglas Aircraft's Long Beach plant, 338 of the 41,620 employees were women. Roswell Monroe became famous as the original Rosie the Riveter. She drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% accuracy. Women inspectors at Douglas reduced defect rates from 3.2% down to just 0.3%. They were better at detail work than most men. Ford actually redesigned their tools to accommodate smaller hands, and something unexpected happened. It inadvertently improved overall efficiency. The lighter pneumatic tools reduced worker fatigue. Better positioned workstations decreased injuries. Production speeds increased. German intelligence looked at American women working in factories and saw desperation. A captured Luftwaffe intelligence report actually dismissed these workers as temporary, predicting quality would collapse. Instead, precision improved dramatically. Women excelled at detailed work, wiring, instruments, inspection. Their integration into the workforce represented democratic strength, not weakness, and the Nazis were completely blind to it. As American production soared to unprecedented heights, Germany retreated further and further into pure fantasy. In February 1944, Göring authorized something called the Jaeger program, a desperate attempt to protect aircraft production by dispersing it into 729 underground facilities using slave labor. The Mittelbau-Dora complex near Nordhausen employed 60,000 prisoners in absolutely horrific conditions. 20,000 of them died. These weren't just tragic numbers. These were human beings worked to death in the desperate hope of building weapons. And here's the bitter irony. Those underground factories produced more defects than aircraft. Slave laborers sabotaged components whenever possible. Transportation between dispersed facilities caused constant delays. Quality control completely collapsed. The entire Mittelbau complex produced fewer engines monthly than Ford's single Chicago plant. Meanwhile, American innovation was accelerating. Boeing developed modular B-29 superfortress construction across 4 separate facilities with completely interchangeable parts. The pressurized B-29, costing $650,000 each, about $10 million in today's money, incorporated technology that Germany couldn't match even in prototype form. By early 1945, America was producing 100 B-29s every single month. June 6, 1944, D-Day, demonstrated the ultimate culmination of American industrial power. The invasion of Normandy employed 11,590 Allied aircraft against just 319 German sorties. That's 36-to-1 air superiority. This wasn't tactical advantage. This was industrial annihilation made visible. Between January and May 1944, preparatory bombing campaigns dropped 145,000 tons of explosives on German targets. That exceeded all German bombing of Britain throughout the entire war. Transport aircraft delivered 3 complete airborne divisions in a single day, using more planes than Germany's entire transport fleet had ever possessed at any one time. By December 1944, single American raids routinely involved 200 heavy bombers escorted by 900 fighters. P-51 Mustangs possessed the range to reach Poland, the performance to match any opponent, and existed in such quantities that losses became almost irrelevant. German pilots called them Indians because they seemed to be swarming everywhere simultaneously. As defeat approached, even Nazi leadership could no longer deny the production catastrophe. In December 1944, Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Göring's promises about Luftwaffe superiority now seem like criminal delusions. We are fighting the world's greatest industrial power with nothing but rhetoric." Field Marshal Erwin Rommel told his staff before D-Day, "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still overwhelm us completely. When they land, they will come with such material, superiority that no defensive position can possibly hold." Even Hitler himself admitted to Albert Speer in January 1945, "We should have listened to von E. Boetticher's reports. Their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands." Albert Speer later testified at Nuremberg that American strategic bombing reduced German production by 35% for tanks, 31% for aircraft, and 42% for trucks. He stated unequivocally, "The American attacks, which followed a definite systematic assault on industrial targets, caused the complete breakdown of German armaments production." Germany's Me-262 jet fighter, operational by mid-1944, represented genuine technological innovation. It was 100 miles per hour, faster than any Allied fighter in service. Hitler and Göring genuinely believed this wonder weapon could restore air superiority despite overwhelming numerical inferiority. But once again, production capacity trumped technological superiority. Germany produced just 1,430 Me-262s total, with never more than 200 operational simultaneously. The jet engines required complete overhaul every 10 hours of flight time. Critical materials were unavailable, forcing engineers to use inferior substitutions that made the engines even less reliable. America, meanwhile, had begun its own jet development in 1942. While the Bell P-59 Comet proved inferior to German jets, Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, which was superior to any German jet, entered production before the war ended. American industrial depth allowed simultaneous pursuit of multiple technologies, a luxury Germany simply couldn't afford. The contrast epitomized the entire production war's outcome. Germany's technological superiority in jets meant absolutely nothing against America's ability to produce thousands of conventional fighters while simultaneously developing next-generation aircraft. Quality without quantity proved worthless in total war. Hermann Göring's arrest on May 8, 1945, by elements of the U.S. 36th Infantry Division marked the beginning of his confrontation with the reality he'd spent years denying. Initially defiant at the interrogation facility in Augsburg, he maintained that German technology had been superior, overcome only by sheer numbers. His transfer to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, the dedicated facility for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, brought intensive interrogation. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews documenting Göring's evolving recognition of just how completely he'd miscalculated. "I knew American industrial potential was great," Göring admitted to Heckler, "but the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at peak production. It was completely incomprehensible to me." He expressed particular astonishment at American logistics. "Your ability to supply military forces across two oceans while simultaneously maintaining domestic production. This was beyond our conception. We couldn't adequately supply forces 500 miles from Germany. You supplied entire armies 5,000 miles from America." During his trial at Nuremberg, prosecutors presented Göring with overwhelming evidence of American production superiority. Charts showed America producing more aircraft in a single month by 1944 than Germany managed in an entire year. Films of Willow Run's assembly lines played while prosecutors methodically listed German cities destroyed by bombers built in that single factory. Göring's testimony on March 14, 1946, revealed his struggle to comprehend the sheer scale. "I believe the economic and technical potential of the United States to be unusually great, particularly regarding air forces. But I never imagined they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in just 4 years. Such exponential growth seemed physically impossible." Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert documented Göring's obsession with production statistics during his imprisonment. He repeatedly calculated ratios, comparing single American factories to entire German production capacity. He seemed particularly fixated on Willow Run, repeatedly calling it "that damned factory that broke our backs," when shown documentation that America had produced 812 through 615 aircraft engines versus Germany's 24-1 675. Göring simply stared at the figures in complete silence for several minutes. The mathematical reality of total defeat was undeniable. The transformation scope remains staggering even today, 8 decades later. From 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, America produced 295 959 aircraft by war's end. Let me break down what that actually means. 710 bombers of all types, 99,465 fighter aircraft, 98,684 trainers, transports, and other aircraft. This represented not just overwhelming quantity, but systemic superiority in absolutely every aspect of production, logistics, innovation, and implementation. 2 million Americans worked in aircraft production at peak mobilization, including unprecedented diversity that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. Women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled workers, teenagers, elderly citizens. Everyone contributed. This democratic mobilization achieved what totalitarian command never could: voluntary cooperation that exceeded forced labors, output by every conceivable metric. The workforce that entered those factories in 1941, knowing absolutely nothing about aircraft production, emerged in 1945 as the world's most skilled aviation workers. They didn't just build planes, they revolutionized manufacturing itself. Statistical quality control developed for bomber production became standard industrial practice worldwide. Automation principles pioneered at Willow Run transformed global manufacturing for generations. The engineers who designed bomber assembly lines would later design the Saturn V rocket that took humanity to the moon. The women who riveted B-24s would raise children who walked on lunar soil. The financial dimensions defied all economic orthodoxy of the time. Aircraft production consumed $45 billion 1940s dollars, equivalent to approximately $800 billion in today's currency. The B-29 Superfortress program alone cost more than the Manhattan Project that developed the atomic bomb. Yet, rather than bankrupting America, war production created unprecedented prosperity. Unemployment, which had plagued the entire Depression decade of the 1930s, vanished completely. Personal income doubled between 1940 and 1945. War bond sales by workers themselves financed much of the industrial expansion. Willow Run workers alone purchased $45 million in war bonds, essentially funding their own factories' operations. Germany, conversely, consumed 40% of its entire industrial capacity for aircraft production by 1944, yet produced less than half of American output. Slave labor, increasingly relied upon as German manpower depleted, proved catastrophically counterproductive. Sabotage was endemic. Quality collapsed. Productivity per German worker actually declined after 1943, while American productivity increased by 300%. The production infrastructure built for war became the foundation for unprecedented post-war prosperity. Aluminum smelters built for bomber production pivoted to producing materials for suburban housing construction. Chemical plants that manufactured aviation fuel created plastics for consumer goods. Machine tool factories that equipped aircraft plants tooled up American industry for decades of global economic dominance. Beyond raw production capacity lay organizational excellence that Germany never matched. The War Production Board coordinated 184,000 companies seamlessly. IBM punch card machines tracked millions of individual components across thousands of suppliers. MIT's Radiation Laboratory, employing 4,000 scientists, developed navigation systems that gave American bombers all-weather capability that Germany couldn't counter. When combat experience revealed B-17 vulnerability to frontal attacks, Boeing added chin turrets within just 60 days. When Pacific operations required extended range, Consolidated modified B-24s without stopping production. German modifications typically took months or even years. American improvements took weeks. This adaptability proved as decisive as sheer production volume. American aircraft evolved continuously based on real-time global combat experience. Information flowed from Pacific battles to Atlantic production lines within days. German aircraft, produced in isolated underground facilities by slave labor, remained essentially static while American designs improved weekly. The feedback loop between combat and production achieved unprecedented efficiency. Pilot observations reached engineers immediately. Engineers' solutions reached assembly lines within days. Assembly line workers' suggestions reached designers directly without bureaucratic filtering. This democratic flow of information proved systematically superior to German hierarchical command structures. A riveter at Willow Run could suggest an improvement that would be implemented across the entire B-24 production line within a week. In Germany, similar suggestions would have taken months to reach decision-makers, if they ever did. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring wrote his final letter. In it, he made his most complete admission of the production war's true significance. The Americans won through industrial power, not military prowess. We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories. The nation we dismissed as capable only of building consumer goods buried the Wehrmacht under aluminum and steel. His last recorded statement to Gilbert was equally revealing. We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us. They revolutionized production itself. Every aspect of their system proved superior to ours. Göring committed suicide that night using a cyanide capsule he'd somehow concealed throughout his imprisonment. But his final testimony stands as history's definitive verdict on the production war. The Reich Marshal, who had dismissed American capabilities with contemptuous laughter, died knowing that a single American factory had exceeded his entire Air Force's lifetime production. Military historians universally consider the American production achievement the single most decisive factor in Allied victory. Without the overwhelming material superiority it provided, D-Day would have been completely impossible. The strategic bombing campaign would have been unsustainable. The Pacific War would have been unwinnable. Richard Overy, the leading historian of the Air War, concluded, "The outcome was determined not by fighting spirit or tactical brilliance, but by the sheer weight of material. The Allies won because they buried their enemies under an avalanche of production that could not be stopped, could not be matched, and could not be survived." The numbers support this assessment absolutely. By 1944, America alone was producing more military aircraft than the entire rest of the world combined. Axis and Allied powers included. This wasn't incremental superiority. This was order of magnitude dominance. Germany didn't face defeat. Germany faced complete industrial obliteration. Yet the production miracle's significance transcended purely military victory. It proved democracy's fundamental superiority to dictatorship. It demonstrated freedom's overwhelming advantage over tyranny. It showed that voluntary cooperation's strength exceeded forced obedience in every measurable way. The workers who achieved this transformation weren't slaves or conscripts. They were free citizens united in common purpose. They could quit. They could protest. They could demand better wages and conditions. And yet they achieved more than slave laborers ever could, because they were working for something they believed in. Hermann Göring's dismissal of American production capacity stands as history's single most catastrophic miscalculation. His contempt for democratic industrial potential cost Germany the war and cost millions of people their lives. His failure to recognize American capabilities sealed the Third Reich's fate before the first American bomber ever reached German skies. The transformation from 3,000 to 100,000 aircraft annually demonstrated that free societies, when facing existential threats, can achieve what seems impossible. American workers didn't just meet Roosevelt's impossible goal, they doubled it. They didn't just match German production, they exceeded it fivefold, while simultaneously fighting a separate war across the entire Pacific Ocean. Today's leaders would do well to remember Göring's mistake, dismissing democratic nations as weak because they prefer peace, or underestimating free people's productive capacity because they prefer prosperity to conquest, invites catastrophic miscalculation. America in 1940 appeared unprepared for war, focused on consumer goods and domestic concerns. By 1944, it had become an unstoppable industrial colossus that reshaped global history. The arsenal of democracy proved that production lines could be as decisive as front lines, that assembly workers could be as crucial as soldiers, that industrial mobilization could determine victory as surely as military strategy. Hermann Göring learned this lesson too late, at the cost of his nation's complete destruction. From his dismissive reaction to Roosevelt's announcement in May 1940 to his execution at Nuremberg in October 1946, Hermann Göring's journey traced the arc of Nazi Germany's destruction. His contempt for American production became the epitaph for the Third Reich itself, a regime that confused ideology with capability, that mistook tyranny for strength, that believed racial mythology could somehow overcome industrial mathematics. The Reich Marshal, who dismissed American aircraft production, died knowing that American factories had produced more planes in 1944 alone than Germany managed throughout the entire six-year war. His mockery of democratic industrial capacity became history's most expensive joke, paid for in the currency of total and absolute defeat. The final numbers tell the story. America produced 295 non-N-59 military aircraft. Germany produced 94 600-1W7. But the real victory lay not in numbers, but in method. America proved that free workers could outproduce slaves, that democratic cooperation could exceed totalitarian command, that a nation of immigrants and diverse citizens could unite to achieve the impossible. The B-24 Liberators rolling off Willow Run's assembly line every 63 minutes weren't just aircraft. They were democracy's answer to tyranny. Each rivet was driven by a woman who'd been a housewife just months earlier. Each engine was built by a teenager who'd left high school to serve. Each wing was assembled by workers who'd fled poverty and discrimination, seeking the American dream. All of them proved that free peoples, when united in righteous cause, could bury tyranny under an avalanche of production that no dictatorship could match or survive. Hermann Göring laughed at the idea of America producing 50,000 planes annually. America responded by producing twice that number, transforming global history in the process. His laughter echoed through history as the sound of catastrophic miscalculation, the fatal dismissal of democracy's arsenal by a man who understood neither democracy nor production. In the end, both buried him and everything he represented under 300,000 aircraft. Those planes turned his contempt into history's most complete and total defeat. They proved that free people, working together voluntarily, could achieve miracles that slave labor and totalitarian command could never match. And that lesson remains as relevant today as it was in 1945.